The wind was cold outside the walls of King's Landing, but inside, the Red Keep, the air felt even colder. Not because of winter, but because of the tension growing in the kingdom. Lord Tywin Lannister stood near a tall window in his private chamber. His golden armor rested on a stand beside him, polished until it shined like the sun. Tywin's face was calm, but his sharp green eyes were thinking deeply. The messenger had arrived only an hour ago with troubling news. Two powerful men of the realm had joined hands. Lord Eddard Stark of Winterfell and Robert Baratheon, the fierce Lord of Storm's End. Together, Tywin slowly turned from the window. An alliance, he said quietly, his voice low but heavy. Across the room stood Jaime Lannister, leaning against the table with his arms crossed. The young knight looked confident as always, but even he knew this news was serious. "They say Stark and Baratheon are gathering banners," Jaime said. "The North and the Stormlands together. That is a lot of swords." Tywin walked toward the table, each step calm and controlled. "Robert Baratheon is strong," Tywin said, "and Ned Stark is honorable. Alone they are dangerous. Together they are a storm." Jaime smirked slightly. "Storms can be broken." Tywin stopped and looked directly at his son. "No," he replied coldly. "Storms destroy careless men." The room fell silent. Tywin picked up the message scroll again and read the last line. "They march to challenge the growing power of House Lannister." Tywin's jaw tightened slightly. Many lords in the realm already feared the power of House Lannister. Their gold, their armies, their influence in the capital, it made other houses uneasy, and now two of the most respected leaders in the Seven Kingdoms had decided to stand together against him. Tywin walked to the large wall table in the center of the room. A map of the Seven Kingdoms covered its surface. He placed his hand on Winterfell. "The Nolit south to Storm's End. Honor and strength," Tywin said quietly. "A dangerous mix." Jaime stepped closer to the map. "So what do we do?" he asked. Tywin looked up. "We do what lions always do," he said calmly. "We confront them." Jaime raised an eyebrow. "You want to meet them?" "Yes." Tywin's voice had the calm certainty of a man who had already planned 10 moves ahead. "If Stark and Baratheon believe they can threaten House Lannister, then they will learn what it truly means to face us." At that moment, the heavy doors opened, and Tyrion Lannister walked into the chamber with a cup of wine in his hand. "I heard rumors in the hallway," Tyrion said casually. "Something about war." Tywin gave him a brief, cold glance. "Not war," Tywin replied. "Not yet." Tyrion sat on the edge of the table and looked at the map. "Let me guess," he said. "The Honorable Wolf and the Angry Stag have become friends." Jaime chuckled softly. Tyrion took a sip of wine. "That sounds like the start of a very bad story for us." Tywin folded his hands behind his back. "Only if we allow it." He looked at the map again, studying every region carefully. "The Stark boy believes in honor. That makes him predictable. And Robert Baratheon?" Jaime asked. Tywin's expression hardened slightly. "Robert believes in strength. That makes him reckless." Tyrion smiled faintly. "So your plan is to outthink one and outweight the other?" Tywin looked at him. "My plan," he said slowly, "is to remind them that lions do not bow to wolves or stags." Outside, thunder rumbled far away, almost like a storm gathering across the Seven Kingdoms. At that very moment, hundreds of miles away in the cold halls of Winterfell, Ned Stark was standing beside Robert Baratheon near a burning fire. Robert slammed his fist onto the table. "Tywin Lannister thinks gold makes him king of the realm," Robert growled. Ned Stark remained calm, but his eyes were serious. "Then we remind him," Ned said quietly, "that the realm is not ruled by gold." Robert grinned fiercely. "It's ruled by steel." The two men looked at the map between them, the north, the Stormlands, and the powerful lands of the west controlled by Tywin Lannister. A clash between them was now unavoidable. Back in King's Landing, Tywin Lannister stood tall beside the war table. For the first time in many years, the Lion of the West had found enemies worthy of his attention. and he was already preparing to face them. The game of power had begun. And when Tywin Lannister finally met Ned Stark and Robert Baratheon face to face, the Seven Kingdoms would shake. The morning sun slowly rose above King's Landing, lighting the tall towers of the Red Keep. But the city did not feel peaceful. Soldiers were moving everywhere, armor clinking, banners waving in the wind. Word had spread quickly. Lord Eddard Stark and Robert Baratheon had arrived outside the city with a large force of Northern and Stormland soldiers. Inside the throne room, the atmosphere was heavy. At the far end of the hall stood Tywin Lannister, wearing his famous crimson and gold armor. Behind him stood several Lannister guards, their lion banners hanging proudly from the walls. Tywin's face looked calm as always, but everyone in the room knew something serious was about to happen. The large doors opened with a loud sound. In walked Robert Baratheon first. He was huge, powerful, and full of raw energy. His thick beard and broad shoulders made him look like a warrior born for battle. Behind him walked Ned Stark, tall and quiet, his grey cloak moving gently behind him. The two men walked straight down the long hall without bowing. The Lannister guards shifted slightly, but Tywin raised one hand, stopping them. Robert looked around the throne room with a half smile. "So, this is where the lion sits," Robert said loudly. Tywin remained still. "And this is where the stag finally arrives," Tywin replied calmly. The tension between them was sharp enough to feel. Ned Stark stepped forward slightly, his expression serious. "We didn't come for insults," Ned said. Robert laughed a little. "Speak for yourself, Ned." Tywin slowly walked down the steps from the throne area until he stood a few feet from them. For a moment, the three powerful men simply stared at each other. The lion, the wolf, the stag, three great houses of the Seven Kingdoms, standing in the same room. Robert crossed his arms. "Let's speak clearly," he said. "Your power has grown too large, Tywin. Gold from the west fills every pocket in the city." Tywin did not look offended. "Gold builds kingdoms," Tywin replied. "Steel defends them," Robert answered quickly. Tywin's eyes briefly moved toward Ned Stark. "And what does honor build, Lord Stark?" Ned's voice remained calm. "Trust." Ned's voice remained calm. Tywin gave a small, almost mocking smile. "Trust is a weak wall against ambition." Robert stepped closer now. "Enough games," Robert said. "The realm is becoming afraid of House Lannister. Lords whisper that you control the throne without wearing a crown." Tywin spoke slowly. "Whispers are wind. Whispers are wind. They change nothing." Ned Stark stepped forward, standing beside Robert. "The realm must remain balanced," Ned said. "No house should grow so powerful that others must fear it." Tywin looked directly into Ned's eyes. "Fear keeps order." Ned shook his head slightly. "No, justice keeps order." For a moment, the room was silent again. Even the guard seemed to stop breathing. Robert suddenly laughed loudly. "Gods, Ned, you always talk like a maester," he said. Then he turned back to Tywin. "Let me speak simply." Robert pointed toward Tywin. "You've grown too powerful, too rich, too confident." Tywin did not move. "And what do you plan to do about it?" Tywin asked. Robert's smile slowly faded. "We remind you that the Seven Kingdoms do not belong to lions." Behind Tywin, Jaime Lannister shifted slightly, resting his hand on the hilt of his sword. But Tywin lifted his hand again, keeping him still. Tywin walked closer until he stood face to face with Robert. Even though Robert was larger, Tywin's calm presence felt just as powerful. "You believe strength and honor will defeat strategy," Tywin said quietly. Robert smirked. "I believe a hammer breaks a lion's skull just fine." Some guards gasped quietly at the bold words. But Tywin only smiled faintly. "A hammer swings wildly," Tywin replied. "A lion waits." Ned stepped between them slightly. "We didn't come here to start a war," Ned said firmly. Tywin raised an eyebrow. "No." Ned looked around the throne room. "We came to prevent one." Robert sighed loudly. "Yes, yes," he said. "Ned wants peace." Tywin folded his hands behind his back. "And what does peace look like to you?" Ned answered without hesitation. The power of the realm must be shared, not controlled by one house. Tywin slowly nodded. Interesting. Then his eyes hardened slightly. But the realm does not reward fairness, Lord Stark. Robert leaned forward. Then maybe it's time someone forced it to. For the first time, Tywin's expression grew slightly colder. Outside the Red Keep, thousands of soldiers waited. The north stood with the Stormlands. And inside the throne room, the lion was facing them alone. Tywin turned away slowly and walked back toward the throne. When he spoke again, his voice echoed across the hall. "If you challenge House Lannister," he said calmly, "then understand this clearly." He stopped at the steps of the throne and looked back at them. "The game you begin today will not end peacefully." Robert grinned. "Good," he said. "We didn't come for peace." Ned Stark looked worried, but he said nothing. Because deep down he knew something terrible had just started. The lion, the wolf, and the stag had finally collided, and the Seven Kingdoms were about to feel the consequences. The meeting inside King's Landing ended without swords being drawn, but everyone in the room understood something important. War had not started yet, but peace had already died. Lord Tywin Lannister returned to his chambers in the Red Keep with the same calm expression on his face. To most people, he looked untouched by the confrontation with Robert Baratheon and Eddard Stark. But Tywin's mind was already moving like a battlefield map. Inside the chamber, Tyrion Lannister was sitting near the window, holding a cup of wine. "Well," Tyrion said casually, "that went better than expected." Tywin slowly removed his gloves and placed them on the table. "You think so?" Tyrion shrugged. "No one died. In this city, that counts as success." Tywin walked to the large map table again. Robert Baratheon and Ned Stark believed they had challenged the lion openly, but Tywin did not fight battles the way Robert did. Robert used hammers. Tywin used minds. Jaime Lannister entered the room moments later. "They are gathering support," Jaime said. "The northern soldiers are camped outside the city walls, and Baratheon's men control the southern road." Tywin nodded slowly. "They are showing strength," he said. Tyrion leaned forward. "So what do we show?" Tywin looked at both of his sons. "We show patience." Jaime frowned slightly. "I would rather show them steel." Tywin's eyes moved toward him. "And that is why you are not the one making this decision." Jaime sighed but said nothing. Tywin placed 3 small lion figures on the map, one near Casterly Rock, one near Casterly Rock, one near King's Landing, and one far to the north. Tyrion noticed it immediately. "You're not planning to fight them directly," Tyrion said slowly. Tywin looked at him with approval. "No." Tyrion smiled slightly. "Good, because Robert Baratheon is the kind of man who enjoys direct fights." Tywin tapped the map near Winterfell. "Robert and Ned Stark are strong together," Tywin said, "but their alliance has a weakness." Jaime crossed his arms. "What weakness?" Tywin looked at him. "Honor." Jaime frowned. "That's a weakness?" Tywin looked at him. "Honor." Jaime frowned. "That's a weakness?" Tywin nodded. "Yes, because honor can be manipulated." Tyrion raised his eyebrows. "Now this sounds interesting." Tywin walked slowly around the table. "Robert Baratheon wants power and glory." Tywin explained. "Ned Stark wants justice." He stopped beside the map. "Those are not the same thing." Tyrion slowly smiled. "So you plan to push them apart?" Tywin did not answer immediately. Instead, he picked up a small raven scroll. "This letter will reach several lords in the north," Tywin said. Jaime looked curious. "What does it say?" Tywin's voice remained calm. "It says that Robert Baratheon plans to take control of the north once the Lannisters are removed." Tyrion nearly laughed. "But that's not true." Tywin looked at him coldly. "Truth is often irrelevant in politics." Jaime slowly realized what Tywin was doing. "You want the northern lords to doubt Robert." Tywin nodded slightly. "Exactly." Tyrion sipped his wine. "And what about Robert?" Tywin placed another scroll on the table. "This one goes to the Storm Lords." Jaime leaned forward. What lie is in that one? Tywin replied calmly. It suggests that Ned Stark believes Robert is too reckless to rule. Tyrion shook his head, impressed. You're planting mistrust in both camps. Tywin looked at him. A strong alliance becomes fragile when doubt grows. Outside the Red Keep, the camps of the North and the Stormlands looked powerful. Thousands of soldiers, banners of wolves and stags flying proudly. But inside those camps, men had already started whispering. Some northern lords were asking questions. Why had Robert come north to make this alliance? Did he want power after defeating the Lannisters? At the same time, in Robert's camp, a Storm Lord quietly approached him. "My lord," the man said carefully, "some say Ned Stark believes you are too wild to rule the realm." Robert's eyes immediately burned with anger. "Who said that?" Robert growled. The lord hesitated. "I heard it from traveling riders." Robert slammed his hammer into the ground beside him. Ned Stark wouldn't say that, but deep inside, the small seed of doubt had already been planted. Meanwhile, in the northern camp, Ned Stark was speaking with one of his bannermen. "My lord," the man said carefully, "some northern houses fear Robert Baratheon may try to control the north after victory." Ned's face became serious. That is not why Robert came here. But even Ned Stark knew one truth. Robert was ambitious. Back inside the Red Keep, Tywin Lannister stood quietly near the window. Far away in the distance, he could see the soldiers outside the city, two armies that believed they were united. Tywin folded his hands behind his back. "They believe they are strong together," Tywin said softly. Tyrion finished his wine, "But soon they may start questioning each other." Tywin nodded slightly. "Yes." Jaime looked toward the distant camps, and when that happens, Tywin's eyes became colder. Then the lion strikes. The real battle had not begun with swords, it had begun with doubt. And Tywin Lannister had just made the first move. The camps outside King's Landing were busy and loud. Thousands of soldiers from the north and the Stormlands had gathered there. Fires burned through the night, horses moved restlessly, and guards watched the city walls carefully. At the center of the northern camp stood the large tent of Eddard Stark. Inside, Ned Stark was studying a map placed on a wooden table. The cold wind moved through the tent flap, but Ned barely noticed it. His mind was busy with many thoughts. Something did not feel right. Since arriving near the city, small rumors had started spreading among the northern lords. Quiet whispers, questions that had no clear answers. One of his bannermen, Lord Manderley, stepped into the tent. "My lord," he said carefully, "the men are uneasy." Ned looked up. "Uneasy about what?" Lord Manderley hesitated before speaking. "Some believe that once the Lannisters are removed, Robert Baratheon may claim greater power over the north." Ned's face hardened slightly. "That is nonsense," Ned said firmly. "Robert is my friend." Lord Manderley nodded, but the doubt in his eyes did not disappear. "I believe you, my lord, but rumors travel faster than truth." Ned sighed quietly. He knew Robert well. They had fought together, laughed together, and trusted each other in battle. But Robert was also a man who loved power, victory, and glory. Ned pushed the thought away. "Tell the men there is nothing to fear," Ned said. Lord Manderley bowed and left the tent. Not long after, a loud voice came from outside. "Where is the wolf hiding?" The tent flap opened suddenly, and Robert Baratheon walked in, holding a mug of ale. Robert looked frustrated. "Gods, Ned," he said, "your camp is full of whispers." Ned frowned. "What do you mean?" Robert threw the mug onto the table. "Some of my Storm Lords are saying you believe I'm too reckless to rule." Ned stood up immediately. "I never said that." Robert stared at him carefully. "That's what they told me." Ned shook his head. "Then they are lying." Robert walked around the table slowly. "Maybe," he said, "but strange things are being said on both sides." Ned crossed his arms. "What strange things?" Robert looked directly at him. "Some northern lords think I plan to control the north after we defeat the Lannisters." Ned's expression darkened. "And do you?" Robert laughed loudly. "Seven hells, Ned. I can barely control my own Storm Lords. Why would I want the north too?" For a moment, both men were silent. They had been friends for many years, but now small cracks were beginning to appear in that trust. Robert rubbed his beard. "I don't like this," he said. "Someone is spreading lies." Ned nodded slowly. "Yes." Both men spoke the same name at the same time. Tywin Lannister. Robert slammed his fist onto the table. "That old lion is playing games." Ned looked serious. "And we must not let him divide us." Robert took a deep breath. "You're right." But even as Robert said those words, a tiny doubt remained in his mind. Tywin Lannister was not a man who made simple moves. Meanwhile, inside the Red Keep, Tywin stood calmly beside the tall windows of his chamber. The city lights flickered below. Behind him stood Jaime Lannister and Tyrion Lannister. Tyrion poured himself another cup of wine. "Reports are coming in," Tyrion said. Tywin turned slightly, and Tyrion smiled faintly. "The camps of the wolf and the stag are full of questions." Jaime looked interested. "Are they fighting yet?" "Not yet," Tyrion replied. "That they are arguing." Tywin nodded slowly. "Good." Jaime leaned against the table. "I still think we should simply crush them with our armies." Tywin walked toward the map table again. "Robert Baratheon is strongest when fighting enemies," Tywin said. He placed a small lion piece near the city. "But he is weakest when fighting allies." Tyrion chuckled softly. "Divide and conquer." Tywin looked at the map carefully. "Soon Robert's anger will grow, and Ned Stark's honor will demand answers." Jaime frowned slightly. "And if they discover the truth?" Tywin's face remained calm. "They won't." Tyrion raised an eyebrow. "You sound very confident." Tywin walked to the window again. Outside the city walls, the campfires of the two armies burned across the dark fields. "They are already starting to doubt each other," Tywin said quietly. "And doubt spreads faster than loyalty." Back in the northern camp, Robert grabbed another mug of ale and looked at Ned. "Tell me honestly," Robert said. "Do you trust me?" Ned answered immediately. "Yes." But Robert asked one more question. "Even with the crown?" Ned hesitated for just a second, a very small pause. But Robert noticed it, and that tiny moment of silence made Tywin Lannister's invisible plan grow stronger. Far away in the Red Keep, the lion smiled slightly in the darkness. The alliance of the wolf and the stag had not broken yet, but the cracks were getting wider, and Tywin Lannister was patiently waiting for the moment they shattered. The tension outside King's Landing had grown thicker with every passing day. Soldiers from the north and the Stormman still stood together, but their laughter had become quieter and their conversations more careful. Whispers were spreading like wildfire. Inside the northern camp, Eddard Stark walked through the rows of tents. His grey cloak moved in the cold wind as he watched his men training and sharpening their swords. But something felt wrong. The northern soldiers were loyal, but they were also cautious men. Many of them had started asking questions about Robert Baratheon. Ned entered the war tent where several northern lords were gathered. Among them were Lord Manderly, Lord Umber, and a few others. The moment Ned walked in, the quiet conversation stopped. Lord Umber spoke first. "My lord," he said, "we have heard troubling news." Ned frowned slightly. "What news?" Lord Manderly stepped forward and placed a scroll on the table. "This arrived from a rider 2 nights ago." Ned opened the letter and began reading. The message claimed that Robert Baratheon had already begun discussing how the North would be ruled after the Lannisters were defeated. According to the letter, Robert planned to place his own governors in northern castles. Ned's jaw tightened. "This is a lie," he said firmly. Lord Umber crossed his arms. "Maybe it is," he said, "but some of Robert's stormlords have been talking about new titles and lands." Ned looked frustrated. "Robert is many things," Ned said, "but he is not a traitor." The northern lords exchanged uneasy looks. "We trust you, Lord Stark," Lord Manderly said carefully, "but our duty is to protect the North." Ned folded the letter slowly. "I will speak to Robert myself." Not far away in the Stormlands camp, Robert Baratheon was sitting near a large fire with several of his stormlords. A massive hammer rested beside him. One of the lords leaned closer. "My king," Robert immediately interrupted. "I'm not king," Robert immediately interrupted. I'm not king, the man corrected himself quickly. My lord, some of the northern men do not trust us. Robert's face darkened. And why not? They say the Storm Lords want northern lands. Robert let out a loud, angry laugh. That's the stupidest thing I've heard all week. But one of the younger Storm Lords spoke carefully. Still, many of us believe the North will never truly accept your authority if the Lannisters fall. Robert drank deeply from his ale. I didn't come here to rule the North, he said. I came here to break the lion. At that moment, the tent flap opened and Ned Stark stepped inside. Robert looked up. Well, speak of the wolf, he said. Ned walked in slowly. We need to talk. The Storm Lords quietly left the tent, leaving the two men alone. Ned placed the letter on the table. Have you spoken about controlling the North after this war? Robert looked confused. What? Ned pushed the scroll toward him. Robert read it quickly, then his face turned red with anger. This is nonsense. Ned watched him carefully. Then why are your lords speaking about it? Robert slammed the scroll onto the table. Because they're idiots. Ned remained calm but serious. Robert, the Northern Lords are worried. Robert looked offended. After everything we fought together, they still doubt me. Ned sighed. This is exactly what Tywin wants. At the mention of Tywin Lannister, Robert's anger shifted. That old lion is poisoning our alliance. Ned nodded. Yes. Robert walked back and forth across the tent. Then we should stop playing his games and attack the city. Ned shook his head. That's what he wants too. Robert stopped. So what do we do? Before Ned could answer, a loud horn suddenly sounded outside the camp. Both men looked toward the tent entrance. Robert grabbed his hammer. What now? A soldier rushed inside. My lords, he shouted. There has been an attack! Ned stepped forward. From the city. The soldier shook his head. No, from the west. Robert frowned. West. That's Lannister territory. The soldier continued speaking quickly. A group of riders attacked one of the northern supply caravans during the night. Several men were killed. Ned's eyes darkened. Were they Lannister soldiers? The soldier hesitated. They were wearing Lannister colors, but something was strange. Robert looked impatient. What do you mean? They left Stormland weapons behind. Both men froze for a moment. Stormland weapons. Robert's expression hardened. You think my men attacked the North? Ned looked troubled. I don't know what to think. But far away inside the Red Keep, Tywin Lannister stood quietly beside the war map. A messenger had just delivered the news. The staged attack had worked perfectly. Tyrion Lannister slowly clapped his hands. That is a very dangerous trick. Jaime Lannister smiled slightly. The wolf and the stag will start tearing each other apart. Tywin's face remained cold and calm. Not yet, he said, but soon. He looked toward the distant camps outside the city walls. Friendship breaks easily when blood is spilled. And now, blood had been spilled. The alliance between Ned Stark and Robert Baratheon was standing on very thin ice, and Tywin Lannister had just struck the ice with a hammer. The night after the attack was restless across the camps outside King's Landing. Fires burned brighter than usual, and guards stood closer together with their hands resting on their swords. Trust was slowly disappearing. Inside the northern camp, Eddard Stark stood near the bodies of several dead soldiers. They had been brought back from the supply caravan that was attacked during the night. The cold wind moved through the camp as Ned studied the scene carefully. Some of the weapons found near the bodies clearly belonged to Stormland soldiers. One of Ned's bannermen, Lord Umber, spoke angrily. My lord, this cannot be ignored. Ned looked at him. We still do not know the full truth. Lord Umber shook his head. Our men were killed. Stormland weapons were left behind. What more truth do we need? Another northern lord stepped forward. If Robert Baratheon is turning against us, we must prepare. Ned raised his voice slightly. Robert would not do this, but the doubt around him was growing. Even if Robert did not order it, Lord Manderley said carefully, his men may have acted on their own. Ned sighed deeply. This is exactly what Tywin Lannister wants. But the Northern Lords were already becoming angry. Meanwhile, in the Stormlands camp, the situation was just as tense. Robert Baratheon stood beside a fire, gripping his famous warhammer tightly. Around him stood several Stormlords, all speaking at once. They accuse us of murder. The North believes we attacked them. Robert slammed his hammer onto a wooden crate, breaking it in half. Enough! The men fell silent. I did not march here to fight Ned Stark, Robert growled. One of the younger Stormlords spoke carefully. But if the North believes we are traitors, they may strike first. Robert looked furious. If they want to fight, I'll give them one. At that moment, a messenger rushed into the camp. My lord, Lord Stark is coming here now. Robert exhaled heavily. Good. Moments later, Ned Stark arrived with several Northern guards. The two leaders stood face to face in the center of the Stormlands camp. The air between them felt heavy. Robert spoke first. Your men are accusing mine of murder. Ned answered calmly. Stormland weapons were found at the attack. Robert spread his arms angrily. And you believe that? Ned's voice stayed steady. I believe something is wrong. Robert stepped closer. You're starting to sound like your suspicious Northern Lords. Ned frowned. And you're starting to sound like a man hiding something. Robert's eyes widened in anger. Hiding something. He pointed toward the Northern camp. I brought my army here because I trusted you. Ned remained firm. And I trusted you as well. For a moment, the two men simply stared at each other. Around them, both Northern and Stormland soldiers watched nervously. A single wrong word could start a battle. Robert finally spoke again. You think I ordered this attack? Ned shook his head slowly. No. Robert looked slightly relieved. But, Ned continued, someone is trying to make it look like you did. Robert looked confused for a moment. Then his anger shifted. Tywin. Ned nodded. Yes. Robert paced back and forth. That old lion staged the attack. Ned looked toward the city walls of King's Landing in the distance. It's a trap. Robert stopped walking. To make us fight each other. Ned folded his arms, and it almost worked. But suddenly, loud shouting broke out near the edge of the camp. Both men turned quickly. A group of Northern soldiers and Stormland soldiers were arguing loudly near a wagon. One Northern man pushed a Stormlander. The Stormlander immediately punched him back. Within seconds, swords were drawn. Stop! Ned shouted. Robert grabbed his hammer and ran toward them. But it was already too late. Steel clashed. A Stormland soldier swung his sword, cutting a Northern man's arm. Another Northern warrior tackled him to the ground. Chaos exploded. Robert grabbed one fighting soldier and threw him aside like a rag doll. Stop this! Robert roared. Ned rushed forward with his guards. Drop your weapons. Slowly the fighting stopped. Several men were injured. One soldier lay dead in the mud. Robert looked furious. This is exactly what Tywin wanted. Ned looked around at the wounded soldiers. And now, more blood has been spilled. Both men stood there silently. Their alliance had survived battles and rebellions before. But now it was being attacked from the shadows. Meanwhile, high inside the Red Keep, Tywin Lannister watched the distant camps through a window. Beside him stood Tyrion Lannister. Reports say fighting broke out between the camps tonight, Tyrion said. Tywin nodded slowly. Good. Tyrion studied his father carefully. You're pushing them closer to war with each other. Tywin looked calm. Men already suspicious need only a small spark. Tyrion smirked. And now the fire is spreading. Tywin turned away from the window. Yes. But then he added quietly, however, Tyrion raised an eyebrow. They are not fools. Tywin looks toward the distant fires again. If Stark and Baratheon realize the truth, his voice became colder. Then the lion will need a different plan. Outside the city walls, the wolf and the stag stood together in the darkness, both now understanding something terrifying. Tywin Lannister was not just preparing for war. He was preparing to destroy them from the inside. The night was dark and quiet outside King's Landing, but the tension in the camps was stronger than ever. Fires burned low as soldiers whispered among themselves about the fight that had broken out between the Northern and Stormland men. The alliance between Eddard Stark and Robert Baratheon had almost collapsed, but now both men understood something clearly. Someone had been pulling the strings from the shadows, and that someone was Tywin Lannister. Inside Ned Stark's war tent, the two leaders sat across from each other. A map of the Seven Kingdoms lay on the table between them, lit by the soft glow of a lantern. Robert was drinking heavily from a mug of ale, while Ned remained quiet, thinking carefully. Robert slammed the mug down. "That lion nearly turned us against each other," Robert growled. Ned nodded. "Yes?" Robert rubbed his beard angrily. "I should have known better. Tywin doesn't fight battles with swords first. He fights with minds," Ned said. Robert leaned forward. "So what do we do?" Ned pointed at the map. "We stop reacting to his tricks." Robert raised an eyebrow. "And we force him to react to us." Robert smiled slightly. "Now that sounds more interesting." Ned explained his idea carefully. Tywin believed the alliance between the wolf and the stag was fragile. He believed a little pressure would break it. So Ned wanted to use that belief against him. "We spread our own rumor," Ned said. Robert looked curious. "What kind of rumor?" "That we are leaving." Robert laughed loudly. "Leaving?" "Yes," Ned continued. "We let Tywin believe our alliance has failed." Robert's smile slowly grew wider. "And while he celebrates, we move our armies secretly during the night," Ned finished. Robert leaned back in his chair. "That old lion will think he has already won." Ned nodded. "Exactly." Robert stood up, energized again. "I like this plan." He grabbed the hammer resting beside him. "For once, we'll be the ones surprising Tywin." Ned allowed himself a small smile. The two men clasped forearms firmly. Their alliance was strong again. Outside the tent, trusted riders were already being sent quietly across both camps. False rumors began spreading among the soldiers. Some men started saying the alliance had failed. Others said Robert was planning to return south. Even spies hidden among the camps quickly carried these rumors back toward the city, and inside the Red Keep, the rumors reached Tywin Lannister. In his chamber, Tywin stood beside the large war map while Tyrion Lannister read a message from a spy. "It appears the alliance has broken," Tyrion said. Tywin turned slowly. "Explain." Tyrion smiled slightly. "Some northern lords are preparing to march back north. Stormland soldiers are also packing their tents." Jaime Lannister looked pleased, so the wolf and the stag finally turned on each other. Tywin studied the map carefully. For a moment, he said nothing. Then he nodded slowly. It was inevitable. Tyrion leaned back casually. "You seem less happy about this than I expected." Tywin looked toward the distant camps outside the city walls. "Because easy victories are often traps." Jaime frowned. "You think this is a trick?" Tywin did not answer immediately. He watched the distant fires of the camps carefully. Then he spoke quietly. "Robert Baratheon is impulsive. Ned Stark is honorable." Tyrion smirked. "Not the best combination for secret strategies." Tywin folded his hands behind his back. "Exactly." He finally turned back toward his sons. If their alliance truly collapsed, Robert would already be charging toward the city. Jaime crossed his arms. "So you think they are pretending?" Tywin nodded slowly. "Yes." Tyrion raised an eyebrow. "And if you're wrong?" Tywin walked to the war table. "Then we will still be ready." He placed several lion pieces around the city walls. "Our armies will move tonight." Jaime looked surprised. "You're marching first?" "Yes." Tywin's voice was calm but firm. If Stark and Baratheon are planning something, he looked toward the dark horizon. "Then we meet them before their plan is complete." Outside the city, the camps suddenly became active. Soldiers quietly packed their gear. Torches moved through the darkness. Robert Baratheon mounted his horse while gripping his war hammer tightly. Beside him, Ned Stark climbed onto his own horse. Robert looked toward the massive walls of King's Landing. "Tonight," Robert said with a fierce grin, "we finally corner the lion." Ned nodded. "Yes." But far inside the Red Keep, Tywin Lannister was already preparing his own move. The final confrontation between the lion, the wolf, and the stag was now unavoidable. and before sunrise, the fate of the Seven Kingdoms would be decided. Before the first light of dawn touched the towers of King's Landing, the fields outside the city had already come alive with quiet movement. Thousands of soldiers marched through the darkness. Torches were covered to hide the light. Horses moved slowly to avoid making noise. The armies of the North and the Stormlands were moving exactly as Eddard Stark and Robert Baratheon had planned. They wanted to surround the city before Tywin Lannister realized what was happening. Robert rode at the front of the Stormland soldiers, his massive hammer resting on his shoulder. His eyes were full of excitement. "Today the lion learns fear," Robert said with a fierce grin. Beside him, Ned Stark rode quietly. "Do not underestimate Tywin," Ned replied. Robert laughed. "I don't fear old men with gold." But at that exact moment, one of Ned's riders galloped forward quickly. "My lord!" the rider shouted. Ned turned his horse. "What is it?" "The western road. Lannister soldiers are already marching." Ned's expression immediately hardened. Robert frowned. "Marching where?" "Toward us." Robert looked surprised. "That means—" Ned finished the thought. Tywin expected this. "That means—" Ned finished the thought. Tywin expected this. Not far away, the rising sun slowly revealed something terrifying. Across the western hills, rows of red and gold banners appeared. The army of House Lannister was already moving, and at the front of that army rode Tywin Lannister himself. On a large golden horse, Tywin sat straight and calm in his armor. Around him rode hundreds of knights wearing crimson cloaks. Behind him stretched thousands of Lannister soldiers. Inside the Red Keep earlier that night, Tywin had already prepared his army. He had guessed that Ned and Robert would try something clever. Now the lion had stepped out of the city to meet them directly. As the two massive armies faced each other in the open fields, the sun slowly climbed above the horizon. The final confrontation had arrived. Robert rode forward with his hammer raised. "Well, look at that," Robert shouted. "The lion finally leaves his cave." Tywin calmly guided his horse forward. Behind him stood Jaime Lannister in shining armor, while Tyrion Lannister watched from a safe distance near the Lannister commanders. Ned Stark rode beside Robert. For a moment, the three powerful leaders once again stood face to face. Tywin looked at them both calmly. "You finally decided to stop playing games." Robert grinned. "I was hoping to smash your gates instead." Tywin replied quietly. "That would have been a mistake." Robert pointed his hammer toward the Lannister army. "You think your gold soldiers can stop us?" Tywin's expression did not change. "I think your alliance cannot survive long enough to defeat us." Ned spoke calmly. "You failed to break our alliance." Tywin looked at him carefully. For now, Robert grew impatient. "Enough talking." He turned his horse and raised his hammer high. "Stormlands, forward!" The Stormland soldiers roared and began charging. Ned Stark quickly raised his sword. "Northern men, hold the line!" The battlefield exploded into chaos. Thousands of soldiers clashed in the open field. Steel crashed against steel. Horses screamed. War cries filled the air. Robert Baratheon charged directly into the battle like a thunderstorm. His hammer crushed shields and armor with terrifying power. Each swing knocked soldiers to the ground. "For the stag!" Robert roared. Nearby, Ned Stark fought calmly and carefully, guiding the northern soldiers with discipline and strategy. But across the battlefield, Tywin Lannister remained calm on the hill, watching the battle unfold. Beside him, Jaime said confidently, "The stag fights like a beast." Tywin nodded. "Yes, and the wolf fights like a commander." "Yes, and the wolf fights like a commander," Jaime smiled. "But the lion fights like a king." Tywin finally gave the signal. Hidden Lannister cavalry units suddenly appeared from behind the hills. They charged into the sides of the northern and Stormland armies. Robert saw them too late. "A ambush," someone shouted. The battlefield turned into chaos. Ned quickly realized what had happened. "Tywin predicted everything," he said quietly. Robert smashed another enemy soldier aside and looked toward Tywin's hill. "That old lion." Even while losing ground, Robert began laughing. "You're clever, Tywin." Across the field, Tywin watched silently. This was not just a battle of swords. It was a battle of minds. The wolf and the stag had strength, but the lion had patience. And in the brutal Game of Thrones, patience was often the deadliest weapon of all. As the battle raged beneath the rising sun, one truth became clear. No matter who won this fight, the Seven Kingdoms would never be the same again. The lion, the wolf, and the stag. Three powers that had shaken the realm, and their clash would be remembered in the history of Westeros forever.